laptop. So we can start, and I would like to welcome Dr. Zheng, who will be giving us a lecture today on the Chinese Schmittians and their versions of the world order. A few words before I give the word to Dr. Zheng about her. She's an assistant professor in the School of Government Affairs at the East China University of Political Science and Law. And she's specializing in contemporary Chinese intellectual studies and political philosophy. She's the author of the book Carl Schmitt, Mao Zedong and the Politics of Transition. Very interesting read. I hope everybody will have a chance very soon to look through. And currently she's a visiting professor at University of Notre Dame, so not that far from us. Dr. Zheng, we are very happy to see you today and looking forward to your talk. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to share my work with you. As you can see, the title of my presentation is Chinese Schmittians and Their Visions of World Order. And I would just like to give you some background knowledge about the Schmittian phenomenon in China. So since 21st century, there is a Schmitt fever in China. So Schmitt has been really very popular in China since the beginning of this century, and it is called Schmitt fever. And in this fever, Schmitt's idea on sovereignty, state of exception, and friend and enemy distinction, and many others are taken by some very prominent Chinese political philosophers and jurists. I define them loosely as Chinese Schmittians. Since the problematic nature of Schmitt's theories and his complicated relationship with Nazi, it is not a surprise that the reception of Schmitt's ideas by these Chinese scholars caused widespread discussions on concerns. I think in a world where authoritarian politics is on the rise, it is natural that some scholars found Schmitt's ideas appealing. But what makes this Schmitt fever interesting is that some of those Chinese Schmittians have close connections with Chinese government. And this close connection between the Schmittians and Chinese government has not only caused some sharp critiques of these scholars themselves, but also produced some serious condemnations of Chinese government's policies. So, for example, some people criticize Chinese government's policies as those that are inspired by Hitler's National Socialism. And the reasoning of these political critics is that Chinese government has been adopting some Schmittian ideas to justify its policies. For instance, Chinese government's handling of Hong Kong's is clearly justified by Schmittian ideas of the supremacy of sovereignty and over the rule of law. Since Schmitt was a Nazi and his ideas are contaminated by Nazism, so and therefore the Chinese government's policy justified by Schmittian ideas are Nazism. By linking Nazi and Chinese government's policy, it seems to be easy to cast serious doubts about the legitimacy of Chinese government's policy. But the problem lies in the fact that even if Schmitt was a Nazi member, it doesn't mean that all his theory is Nazism. And the application of some of his theory in justifying Chinese government's policy do not necessarily lead to the conclusion that Chinese government's policy is Nazism in its nature. So I think it's easy to totally deny the other's legitimacy by defining it as something absolutely morally wrong. But it is probably not the fruitful way for us to understand the nature of Chinese policy. So take China's and Hong Kong policy for an example. What is needed is a serious engagement with the argument about the relationship between sovereignty and the constitution in the state of emergency. The question needed to be explored are whether Chinese government has abused the idea of the state emergency and the supremacy of sovereignty of the rule of law. However, I think calling the policy a fascist policy just makes all the serious discussions unnecessary. Sorry. But this talk actually is not really interested in exploring whether Chinese government's policy are Schmittian. Instead, the question that I am I aim to explore is how Chinese Schmittians understand the world order and China's role in it. In other words, I will investigate how they justify Chinese government policy, in particular in the area of international relations. So in order to explore this question, and my talk will be divided into 3 sections. The first one is going to deal with Liu Xiaofeng's interpretation of Schmidt's work, and the second section will focus on the writings of a famous Chinese Schmittian, Zheng, on the international order. And the final one, I will have a brief conclusion, and I will review that actually this Schmittian's visions of future world order actually contradicts the very core ideals of Schmitt's theory. And I will also point out some potential consequences of their visions of world order. Okay, so now we move on to the first section. It's about Liu Xiaofeng and the international law as a law of the jungle. Okay, so I will give you a little bit background of who Liu Xiaofeng is. He actually plays an important role in introducing Carl Schmitt's political philosophy to a contemporary Chinese audience. Just like Dr. Charlotte Cross says that if we were to identify one single scholar who can be said to have paved the way for a broader discussion of Schmitt in China, it would have to be Liu Xiaofeng. So Liu has not only organized translation and publication of almost all Schmitt's major works and numerous secondary literatures on the philosopher into Chinese, but also he has written many influential works on Schmitt himself. So I think anyone who wants to understand the Schmittian phenomenon in China must not ignore Liu's writing. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to focus on Liu's article. The title of his article is "The Free Space of European Civilization and Modern China." And in this article, he focused on Schmitt's The Normals of the Earth. His writing actually represents a new approach to reading Schmitt in China. Instead of focusing on Schmitt's general political philosophy on constitutional theory, Chinese readers actually have started to explore the significance of Schmitt's thoughts on international political order. So with the publication of the Chinese version of The Normals of the Earth in 2017, more and more academic works have been devoted to analyzing Schmitt's theory of the world order and its potential significance for rethinking China's role in the world. Okay, so to Liu, he found that Schmitt provides a very special discourse on global history in his work as The Normals of the Earth. So in contrast to contemporary global history studies that focus on people's ordinary social lives, on changes in social structures, Schmitt's writing continues to put the state activity at the center. So according to Liu, these differences originate in the different perception of the world order between the proponents of new global studies and Schmitt. The proponents of contemporary global history studies presuppose that the conflict between the European civilizations to obtain global dominance has come to an end. But Liu argues that Schmitt does not define the end of the European era as the end of the fighting between European countries. Instead, in fact, fighting that used to be limited to Europe has now become global. In other words, when Schmitt wrote his work in 1950s, he defines the world as a place of global conflict in which great powers were fighting for global dominance. So Liu is obviously very convinced by Schmitt, and he believes that we are still living in this historical moment of global conflict. So he spent a lot of energy in analyzing Schmitt's perception of the world history by analyzing his the history of global lines. So if you have read Schmitt's Normals of the Earth, you know that Schmitt divided the history of global lines into 3 stages. So because of the limited time that we have, so I'm not going to go into details about how Schmitt describes this history, but I will only focus on what Liu has learned from, on Liu's conclusion about his reading of Schmitt's book. Okay, so Liu actually, he draws an extraordinary conclusion about Schmitti's hidden thought on the nature of the United States. So by reading Schmitti's works on the history of global lines, Liu is fascinated by Schmitti's definition of the Western Hemisphere as the last stage of global lines. So by reading lines, he found there is an extraordinary conclusion about the nature of the United States politics. So he argues that according to Schmitt, he believes that the fundamental political principle of American politics is a law of the jungle. So based on the evidence that he found, Liu argues that Schmitt extremely carefully formed a perception of the nature of America. Schmitt implicitly indicates, according to Liu's reading, that the founding of the United States and its rising follows the law of the jungle as a state of nature. Therefore, it is not surprising that the international order dominated by America to some extent is consistent with European international law as both follows the law of the jungle. The differences probably lies in the fact that the amity lines restricted the law of the jungle to the New World, whereas America made the law of the jungle global. To Liu, the global application of the law of the jungle is merely the breadfruit of the European international law. So this is the first thing that he draws from his reading of Schmitti's description of the history of global line. That is about the nature of the American politics. And then he went on to claim about something more about the nature of international law and its related international institutions. So Liu claims that the history of global lines clearly reveals the nature of the international law and its international institutions. International law originates in the fighting that follows the law of the jungle. In order to settle their disputes and conflicts, great powers enter into treaties with each other. These treaties constitute international law. Therefore, international law acknowledges the legitimacy of the law of jungle in international politics. To Liu, the nature and spirit of European international law is a law of the jungle. So in the sphere of international politics, everything depends on the strength of the relevant country. This is an area where the law of the stronger applies. Therefore, after briefly describing the history of the encounter between modern China and international law, Liu argued that the fundamental lesson that European international law teaches China is that China has to be a real sovereign state. And the sovereign state can only be obtained from its military strength. This is a basic precondition for China to enter into the European international order. Okay. And Liu also, according to Liu, the history of global line also indicates that the contemporary world politics cannot avoid conflict or struggle between America and China, as the rise of the latter will bring different norms into world history. So the conflict would be between two different norms. And China will divide the world according to a new global line. So the conflict between present global lines dominated by America and the Chinese global line is inevitable. So according to Liu, this is a basic fact of today's international politics. So, okay, so we can see that by reading Schmitti's The Norms of the Earth, Liu draws a conclusion about the basic characteristics of what today's international politics is. He thinks that we are still living in the era where there's a conflict between great powers. Is a basic fact of today's politics. So whether Liu has correctly understood Schmitti's thought to some extent does not matter. I think what really matters to us is what Liu's vision of the world order represents. Okay. So the fundamental problem, I think, with Liu's vision of the world political order is that he stresses the dimension of the state of exception while completely ignoring the other dimension of international law. So such neglect means that his vision of the world order is a world purely based on the force. Okay, This vision, I think, is understandable to some extent. The history of modern China in Liu's writing demonstrates that the country belonged to the free space of international law. Therefore, international law as a law of the jungle is a direct experience of Chinese people. However, this bleak vision of the world order has potentially serious consequences. This is evident in Liu's brief comments on the new normals of China. Although Liu does not clarify the content of the new Chinese normals, he makes it clear that drawing lines on Earth is contingent on the military victory in conflicts. Normals is based on brute force. For a world where there is struggle between the normals of the United States and the new normals due to China's rise, violence is probably inevitable. But in a world that follows the law of the jungle, it is almost impossible to find any motivation to tame violence. Violence would be automatically justified everywhere, as international law itself is viewed as a law of the jungle. So I think this is probably something is really worrying. Okay, so this is about Liu's vision about the world order. He believes that we're still living in an age where great powers are fighting for the global dominance, and the conflict between the U.S. and China is inevitable. Since the latter will try to draw a new global line. Okay, so now let's move on to the second section about Zheng's vision of the world order. So Zheng Sigong, he is a professor from Peking University. Yeah, and he's actually one of the most prominent Chinese Schmittians who works in the field of constitutional theory. He used to be a researcher in Peking's liaison office in Hong Kong from 2004 to 2008. And he actually was one of the writers for the white paper on one country, two system policy in Hong Kong in 2014. So although he is generally considered as a constitutional jurist, Zheng has recently written extensively about the international politics. Zheng's writing has clearly demonstrated how he sees today's world order and what China really will play in the future. Okay, as we know that in the area of international relations, Thucydides' trap is a well-known theory proposed by Professor Allison to describe the Sino-US relations. And the theory predicts that US as an existing great power and China as a rising power are likely to end in conflict in the future. However, Zheng points out that this theory is completely wrong in understanding the nature of Sino-US relations. To Zheng, the fundamental problem with the theory is that it assumes a relationship between US and China as that between two independent sovereign states. On the contrary, Zheng argues that the relationship between the US and China is that between an empire and a nation state. So this understanding actually reveals Zheng's perception of the current world order. He thinks that the most fundamental characteristic of the current world order is the existence of a US empire. So in order to understand this world order, Zheng writes that the political theories in West, which focus on the sovereign states, are not sufficient. Instead, we need to have a brand new theory which embraces the perspective of empires. Okay, so to Zheng, empire is a supersized political entity. And he believes that the human history is a history of development from regional empires to world empire. And a regional empire is the one that is bound to land, and its sources of its fortune is a land. So it focuses a lot on expanding its territory. And Zheng also calls this kind of empire as visible empire. In contrast to that, Zheng argued that world empire is not bound by any territory boundaries, and it actually can reach every corner of the world and is truly global. And he also calls it as a and invisible empire. For Zheng, most empires in human history were invisible. The most empire in human history are visible. For example, Empire of Mongolia is typical visible empire. But different from the visible empire, the empire of free trade established by Britain is the first empire of world. To some extent, it is a transitional empire between the past and the present. On the one hand, it is based on international trade and finance, so it is not bound by territory. On the other hand, it has a certain reliance on territory, so it still has many colonies. So British Empire has combines characteristics of visible and invisible empires. And today's empire built by the US is truly invisible. It is the second empire of the world. According to Zheng, US has completely abandoned the characteristics of a visible empire. It does not have any colonies. Instead, it relies on technology, finance, ideology to control the world. So this is a basic fact of today's international politics. We are living in a world where there is a U.S. empire, and this empire is invisible. And Zheng actually raises three criticisms of this empire. First one is he believes that he argued that the empire has become the greatest barrier to the development of the world economy and the welfare of all the people in the world. In the empire, there is a central periphery system. In this system, U.S. stay in the center, while the other country at the periphery. With the development of technology and commons, other countries will try to change the center periphery system. However, U.S. will use its military, financial, and legal and political powers to suppress this effort should it happen, since it wants to maintain the inequality between U.S. and the other countries. So Zheng calls for all the progressive forces in the world to destroy this world empire and establish a brand new world order. And in the second critique, Zheng argued that there is a deep contradiction between the need for global governance and American first principle adopted by U.S. U.S. enjoys the power to control the world without taking its moral political responsibilities. Zheng argued that the fundamental problem in the empire is a lack of real governor in the world. A real governor of the world benefits from its dominating role in the empire, but it also takes on responsibilities as governors. Okay, this is the second critique. The third critique is about the ideology of the end of history. Zheng writes that every civilization and religion needs to reflect on its own limitations and seeks to coexist with each other. But the ideology of the empire of the world has always been promoting the end of history. To promote this ideology means to promote the civilizations that it represents. This constitutes the legitimacy for U.S. to persuade and compel other countries to adopt liberal democracy. However, it will lead to conflict rather than dialogue between different civilizations. Okay, so Zheng thinks that we should abandon the ideology of the end of history and the empire of the world. In order to maintain a dialogue between different civilizations, he believes that the Asian Chinese civilization is the only one that could promote peaceful coexistence between different civilizations. Okay. So Zheng believes that China will not only establish its own unique political system, but also a brand new world order. And this new world order will be a Chinese one, for one with a very strong Chinese influence. Since Zheng believes that this the U.S. led empire is very problematic, has many crises as he raised in his criticism. So he thinks that we should establish a new one, a new world order, a world order with a very strong Chinese influence. So this new world order actually will be based on a principle. This principle is called 天下. In English, it should be translated as all under heaven. Okay, and this new world order will be based on this Chinese principle of 天下. According to this principle, all civilizations will have their right to develop their own way of life. So, in other words, civilizations will harmoniously coexist in the world. This new world order is called a community of shared destiny for mankind. In this new world order, there will be a world government based on the principle of 天下一家 one world, one family. Although it is not very clear what role China will play in building this community and its government, it is safe to say that China will be a dominating force, if not the only dominating force. So we can see that on the surface, this is Zheng's summary of the differences between these two world orders, the existing world order and the world order that he proposes. I think it's probably good for us to take a look at what Zheng writes. Okay, I'm just going to read this paragraph for you so you can get a basic ideas of what the differences between these two orders. Zheng writes that we can see the two diametrically opposed views of international order. One is imperialist and hegemonic view of the world imperial order championed by the United States on the basis of economic and military hard power and cultural soft power. The other is China's one world, one family order based on the concept of harmony without uniformity, which supports the solution of dispute through dialogue within the framework of the United Nations and is committed to construction of a community of human destiny in the era of globalization. Okay, so we can see that I think that on the surface, you probably will feel that, oh, this kind of global order on world order kind of very different from each other. And what Zheng proposes is kind of radical on surface. But I actually, if we read what Zheng writes carefully, we will find that actually what he proposes is not as radical as we may think. I would like to use Professor Johnston's argument here, because he argued that international order actually is constituted of different orders, and China's role and relationship to different orders is complicated. China is supportive of some, unsupportive of some, and partially supportive still others. So we will find actually Zheng's vision of the future world order actually will only change the constitutive order and the political development order of the currently international political system on political order. Okay, the first one is that it's a constitutive order. Constitutive order refers to the norms and institutions that constitute the main actors and their primary interests. The fundamental emergent properties in modern state systems are sovereignty and territoriality. From Zheng's criticism of US-led world empire, it is not difficult to tell that he is critical of its attitude towards sovereignty. US-led world empire endorses the ideology of the end of history and aims to spread liberal democracy around the world. However, a sovereign country should have its own right to decide what kind of political system that it should adopt. On the contrary, the idea of one world, one family demonstrates a strong commitment to the basic idea of sovereignty. So in Zheng's vision of the world order, every country's sovereignty will and its right to rule according to its will be strictly defended. Therefore, the constitutive order and the attitude towards sovereignty will be changed from the existing world empire to the new world order. And the second is about the political development order. It will also be changed. Political development orders seem to be based on the notion that states should support liberal political change inside other sovereign states under certain conditions. And of course, should also organize themselves as democracies. Due to its ideology of the end of history, US-led empire usually actively embrace the idea or practice of political democratization. However, Zheng's proposal about one family, one world, one family is strongly against this idea on practice. His attitude ultimately has to do with, I think Zheng's attitude has ultimately to do with defending the rule of Chinese Communist Party. In a community of shared destiny for all mankind, the legitimacy of the CCP's rule is absolute. So Zheng's attitude toward the change of constitutive order and political development order actually is not much different from what has been proposed since Deng's era. Since then, Chinese government also supports the idea of sovereignty and against a regime change. So Zheng's writing actually are really not that as radical as we might thought or we might think. So what is truly interesting is about Zheng's proposal about what is truly interesting, I think, is about the role that China will play in the future. So although Zheng emphasizes the differences between the existing world empire and the new international order, he actually admits that what is going to be established will still be an empire. It will be a new world empire. Okay. And in this empire, there will be a world government. Okay. However, if there will be a new government, a question about who governs will naturally arise. And Zheng has actually not clearly defined or clarified about this question. He vaguely writes that it should be a democratic system where all the people in the world will participate. As a Schmittian, she should know clearly that the issue of who governs cannot be avoided. The answer to the question is likely to be China, since China is a country that is committed to the fundamental principle of the empire, that is one world, one family. Okay, so what Zheng proposes is actually a new world empire led by China. Okay, so this is Zheng's vision of the future world order. So it's going to, the current world order is the US-led empire, and this empire has a lot of problems. And Zheng proposes a new world empire which has a very strong Chinese influence in it, and he believes this new world order will replace the current existing world order. Okay, so I want to come to a brief conclusion about this Chinese Schmittians vision of the world order. We can tell that there are actually some differences between Liu's vision of the world order and Zheng's vision of the world order, but they do share something in common about the future. So to both of them, China will develop a new international order. Liu argues that China will draw a line in the world according to its will. Compared with Liu's rather philosophical argument about the future world order, Zheng is more specific about what future world order will be and the role China plays in it. Due to the change of international order, both of them also believe that the conflict between the US and China is inevitable. I think their vision represents their shared dissatisfaction with the liberal international order led by the US. It is actually consistent with Schmitt's own critique of US-led international order after the Second World War. Nevertheless, Schmitt actually proposes his theory of great powers, great spaces, to replace the US-led international order. In Schmitt's theory, the world is plural. In other words, there will be many great spaces. And in a great space, there are many countries that are homogeneous, but there will be one dominant power in the great space. Liu and Zheng, however, did not propose that China should form a great space. In fact, what they propose actually contradicts directly with Schmitt's vision of great spaces. Okay, and I think so. The potential problem, I will also talk a little bit about what the potential problems with the new world order. I think there are at least two problems. The first one is about the conflict and violence and persecutions in the new world order. So there have already been a lot of discussions about the potential problems in a Chinese world order based on Tianxia. It is not problematic because it is Chinese, but because it is likely to form a new center periphery system. It will still be full of violence and persecutions and so on. In a word, the problem in the liberal international order that the Chinese one aims to solve will reappear in Tianxia. What is probably more worrying, however, I think, lies in Chinese Schmittians' attitude towards conflict and violence. Neither Liu nor Zheng has ever thought about the possibility of a peaceful transition. To Liu, it seems that if China wants to establish a new international order, it has to resort to its military strength. And Zheng, although he does not directly call for military action to destroy the liberal international order, he believes that a certain kind of conflict is inevitable as a time of change in the international order. So neither of them seems to realize that there have been a peaceful transition in history, like the transition from a UK-led international order to a US-led one. So this ignorance may have huge consequences in reality, especially if they have some influence in the Chinese government's policy-making process. I think in a world where rising power has never considered a peaceful transition, conflict seems to be more likely than ever. Okay, this is my talk. Yeah,
Thank you very much.